Hey guys, I'm John and welcome to Respect Your Intellect. Today we'll be doing part 1 of our follow-up to the answers that were offered by Flat Earther Phuket Word in response to my 20 questions video. Let's get started. One thing that keeps coming back from the Flat Earth community is that these questions have been answered before. He says the same thing at the beginning of his video as well. While I don't doubt that that's true, simply answering is not enough. As any student can confirm, answers can be incorrect. So let's keep that in mind as we continue. Now, his response to these 20 questions are spread across 2.5 hours on his 2 videos, so I'll save you some time by just summarizing his points and his answers and then replying to them. If you want to see the full length of his answers, feel free to go check out his videos on his channel. Alright, let's not lose any more time and just jump into it. To start with, he makes quite a few points before even starting the question, so I'll summarize and answer those before we begin. The first thing he says is that science is a religion. That's just plain wrong. I have a video specifically about why science requires no belief system at all, so instead of answering it in this video, just go see my other video right here. If you want to leave that till later, just know that there is absolutely no part of science that requires belief of any kind. Perhaps only in the very beginning stages when formulating your hypothesis, but as soon as testing begins, belief has no place in science. Evidence always speaks for itself. He also says that the Big Bang is a belief, but that's not correct at all. In space, there's essentially nothing present to stop linear momentum of moving objects like entire galaxies. When we discovered that the universe is expanding and accelerating, we also realized that this expansion could be reversed and traced back to an initial event. We just don't know what made it happen in the first place, and our understanding of it is continuing to evolve at this point. We also found the predicted cosmic microwave background, which was theorized to be the heat left after the Big Bang, so it's not like we don't have a lot of evidence to support it. The Nobel Prize in Physics of 1978 was awarded for this. We started from valid observations, we made predictions based on it, and confirmed that the predictions were true. Now we're trying to fill in the missing gaps that we still don't know about at this point. He also picked on the challenge rule number 3 about hearsay not being evidence. When I came up with this rule, it was because many flat earthers had already tried making their points using nothing but a quote from someone a century ago. That was the goal of this rule, to not have hearsay as the only piece of evidence. If people had opinions or documentation that support a verifiable claim, then there's no problem in using that. I told him this before he made his second video, which covered questions 13 to 1. So questions 20 to 14 have this mention of hearsay quite a few times. Another thing he picks on is that answers must be more complete than what we already know. This is about rule 4 and 5 of the challenge. He says that we make progress by taking steps back. That's not true. Science always integrates the things that offer more solid explanations than what we already know. We don't throw out knowledge to restart from the beginning and hope for different results. That's just the definition of insanity. Once our understanding of something is used to make accurate predictions about future events, it doesn't really go back to the drawing board. We just extend our knowledge as more information comes in. Anything that replaces an already established theory must be more complete and offer a better understanding of whatever it describes. This can be seen with how Newton calculated gravity that was very accurate, but some things were still left unanswered, like the precession of the orbit of Mercury. Then came Einstein that figured out why this precession was happening and explained many other things in the process as well. Einstein never simply decided to forget about Newton's discoveries to re-examine gravity himself from the beginning. He always kept it in mind as he developed his new theory of general relativity, and it resulted in an extension of our knowledge about gravity, not a reinvention. Another thing he says is that everything is models and that anything can be turned into a model. That's incorrect. Some experiments are meant to eliminate possibilities as models. Think of when the first experiment was performed between Alexandria and Syene. At the summer solstice, the sun was directly overhead at 1 and cast no shadows at all. This allowed you to see the very bottom of a well, which never happened usually. At the same time, the sun was still casting 7-degree shadows at the other location. By using the distance between the two, Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth to fairly close to today's accepted value. Later, they realized that this could also work on a flat surface with a more local sun, so it didn't completely eliminate the possibility of a flat Earth. So after that, they simply repeated the experiment with 3 points instead of 2. This completely eliminates the possibility of a more local sun on a flat surface because only a sphere can explain 3 or more shadows accurately. No other reasonable shape can do that. So at that point, you can't have a realistic flat Earth model anymore because we already know it doesn't work. Simple shadows prove it incorrect every day. Then we also have thousands of travel routes happening every day that work with a globe but not a flat surface. We also have our GPS system that is based on satellites orbiting us and calculates distances on a globe. And the list goes on and on. The flat Earth model is nothing more than non-scientific fiction that you just wish could be true because it requires less effort on your part than learning the intricacies of science. He also says that we just added mathematical quirks to explain the globe. Actually, that is what was being done when we were still working under a geocentric model because too many things couldn't be explained in that model. That's when we added a lot of quirks that didn't stand up to scrutiny and eventually led to the fall of the geocentric model. Also, what we write down on paper has no impact on how things behave in reality. So it's not like we put something on paper and all of a sudden things change their behaviors to match what we wrote down. It's the behavior of things that determines what we end up writing down. As our understanding increases, so do the specifics of that documentation. Another thing he says is that gravity is just weight and density. Those have no effect without gravity acting on the object, so he's assuming that there's only one universal down direction in space. If you mix oil and water in zero gravity or microgravity, they stay mixed. So that eliminates the idea of a universal down direction. You need gravity to pull on one substance more than the other in order to get that separation. There's a question about gravity though, so we'll talk more about that in a few moments. The last thing he says in his precursor is that the globe is given to us as knowledge. Well, yes, because that's what we teach our children, knowledge. We don't teach them what we would hope to be true because it's easier on us. We give them verified information. Everything can be explained with a globe if you take the time because it has the benefit of being reality. When it becomes hard is when you try to match fiction to reality. Then you're left with so many holes and unanswered questions that it's even questionable if it's easier on you at all in the long run. The flat Earth model has fatal problems from every single angle you look at it. All that to say that in school we teach knowledge, not what we would hope to be true because it's easier to subscribe to. Alright, well that was quite the precursor, so in order to keep this video at a watchable length, we'll be covering only the first 5 answers in this video. I'll be making future parts to respond to all the answers given. I'll just have to see how many I can cover in each video while keeping the duration reasonable. Now on to the actual answers. Question 20. Why has the ice wall never been seen? His answer? He says it's silly to ask this question because you can't see very far in any condition. He also says that he doesn't know if there's an ice wall. Fair enough. This is a good example of an everyday theory versus a scientific theory. This is just something that would make sense to you but hasn't had any verifiable experiments performed. So you simply say it and kind of hope that it's true. Scientific theories, on the other hand, are only written down after there's been plenty of verifiable information and experiments. Then it's up to the entire community to try and disprove it. The failure to do that means that the theory is sound. Theories explain why things happen while laws explain what happens. Both of them are viewed as facts. The analysis? So this question was simply avoided. During our history, at least one person should have made it to the edge if it was real. As for not being able to see very far, there are a lot of long-range pictures taken where even with the challenges that the curved surface of the Earth poses, people have been able to take pictures hundreds of miles long from high points of elevation. Surely you could get close enough to see an edge with a telescope if it was real. You can see my video about the challenges we face on a spherical Earth for long-range photography right here. On a flat Earth, there would be less complications and we could see even further in good viewing conditions. Also, as a side note, no one denies the existence of ice shelves, but those are not that tall and are far from being an impenetrable wall that would prevent you from getting to an edge with a firmament. Simple ropes could get you over ice shelves very easily. As you know, there are also South Pole tour flights and cruises. A lot of those people record their experiences too. And finally, there's the Antarctic Treaty that's considered considered the most successful treaty in history. This treaty encourages freedom of scientific research and prevents any one nation to make a claim on that land. Any military activity has to be announced beforehand as well, and any scientific discovery made there has to be freely accessible by all countries. That's a lot of agreements and a lot of countries for a continent that doesn't even exist on the flat earth model. Score? Fail. The question was avoided. Question 19. Why do boats disappear bottom first? His answer? The first thing he said was that he felt insulted that I said they used scientific terms they don't really understand. While based on how the flat earth community uses refraction, one can only conclude that they don't know how it works. There's simply no other way to put it. While I don't doubt that some people do understand it, the majority are using it incorrectly and it doesn't help make their points. The simple remedy to this is to go and understand how it works. He also thinks I'm saying we should ignore refraction and lensing and that it's ignorant on my part. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is just to use it properly, because what's ignorant is using it completely incorrectly. If refraction was applied properly, they would realize that at least half the time, refraction doesn't help support their claims. Now for the first boat example, it's true that there's a tiny bit of mirage happening there and could hide a bit of the hull. The sailboat is still clearly below the horizon even with the mirage taken into account, but we'll skip this part to avoid any denial due to mirages. For the second boat example, he's using waves near the beach to talk about the horizon. The horizon is really calm with no big waves. The horizon is not lifted higher by a wave, and even if it was, it wouldn't be able to stay this high for over an hour if it was a simple wave. The horizon is very steady over the entire hour-long video and doesn't move at all. The curve is just hiding the hull gradually more and more until it's entirely below. He's also saying that on the beach it was a bumpy horizon and didn't allow him to see as far, and that's why going up the hill allowed him to see most of the boat again. But again, the water was fairly calm and the horizon line was steady throughout the entire hour-long video. This was not rugged terrain with hills and mountains, this was water. Having waves obstruct your view that only 40 feet of elevation would allow you to see over, while those waves would be considered tsunamis. Then he mentions air temperature differences and fluctuations. Those differences cause mirages like we see slightly on the first video, or as you see over a hot asphalt road on a hot summer day. It makes boats or cars appear to float above the ground, and there's a bit of mirroring effect happening. The video with the cruise ship has no such mirages at all. He also says, like all flat earthers, that the curve has not been measured. Yes, it has. Thousands of times at least, and it's been measured since 300 BC. It's been refined over time to exclude any possibility of a local sun or a flat surface, and it's been further refined to be a more precise value using more precise instruments. Your unwillingness to see it doesn't negate its existence. The last thing he says is that things might disappear due to atmospheric conditions before reaching the vanishing point from your point of view. This is the first really correct thing that's been said up until this point. In the second boat example though, atmospheric conditions were good and the boat could still be very clearly seen as it went below the horizon. The fact that it had lights on would also make it visible in worse viewing conditions. Analysis? He says that a wave is responsible for hiding the boat and that the elevation allowed him to see most of the boat again. A wave that spans the entire horizon to hide this boat while you have 40 feet of elevation would be considered a tsunami. Most tsunamis only cause the sea to rise 10 feet and creates extreme destruction. Here we could see a very calm and steady horizon line, and it was simply the boat going below it slowly. It was even easier to see with all its lights. Score? Fail. The ocean doesn't experience the waves he's describing that are as wide as the entire horizon in this video without being a natural catastrophe. Question 18. How are lunar eclipses possible and always circular? His answer? He says it's hearsay and hasn't been observed by anyone. While we had parallax measurements of the sun, moon, and stars for a couple hundred years at least, these measurements work out perfectly and it allowed us to launch satellites and probes at the very least, even if you don't believe in a moon landing. You can experience many of these accurate predictions for yourself too by looking at upcoming astronomical events. Flat Earth can't explain any of it. He also says that lunar eclipses happen when both the sun and the moon are over the horizon at the same time. As long as he's not confusing the phases of the moon with eclipses, this is one of the times where refraction actually comes into play. Eclipses only happen when the sun, earth, and moon are aligned, but due to refraction, we can see things above the horizon even though they're actually below. This is called a selenelion, and you can go read more about it. His main answer about the eclipse is that they don't know what causes it, and he says it doesn't mean that it happens from a globe Earth. He thinks it could be another object casting a shadow. While we already have the answers to all of that, and we can predict everything with perfect precision down to the second. We can predict exactly what portion of the moon will go through the penumbral and umbral shadows, giving us different types of eclipses that we can also predict perfectly. Just a few weeks ago, we had a lunar eclipse that was predicted down to the second that would pass 20% in the Earth's umbral shadow, giving us a nice blood moon eclipse. It happened exactly when it should have and looked exactly like it should have. That's a lot of knowledge you're willing to throw away for a model that can't answer anything. It's all perfectly explained on a round rotating Earth with a faraway round sun and a nearby round moon in orbits determined by gravity. Another thing he says here is that it's hearsay. No, it's not. It just happened a few weeks ago with perfect precision. It'll also keep happening with perfect precision as we move forward. Then he goes on to say that a dinner plate casts a circular shadow. That's only true if it's perfectly perpendicular. As soon as it's any other angle, you would get any other shape from ovals to lines. Yet we only ever see spherical shadows. This can only be explained by a sphere because it's the only shape to always cast a circular shadow regardless of the angle. Then he says he doesn't know what the moon really is and that it's just part of the cosmic clock up there. Honestly, we're not hearing too many actual answers up until this point. This isn't really helping your case. On top of that, he says that the sun and moon behave in exactly the same way. That brings up more questions than it answers. How are moon phases possible then? We know that the phases of the moon are on a 29.5-day cycle, but that doesn't work on your model where the cycle is the same every day. And finally, he mentions a concave moon that could explain the shadows we see on it. Now, even he says it might sound ridiculous, so I'll just leave that one at that. Analysis? He offers no explanation and has to eliminate the knowledge we use to calculate and predict upcoming events with perfect precision. We calculate these by using orbits and gravity, or in other words, objects moving through space, and they always come out perfect. Nothing he said can be considered any sort of answer to this question. Score? Fail. In 2019, they still don't know what causes eclipses. Question 17. How is Earth's magnetic field generated? His answer? He thinks I'm saying that our magnetic field holds down our atmosphere. The magnetic field doesn't hold down our atmosphere, it repels charged particles that we receive from the sun, otherwise known as solar wind, before it can interact with our atmosphere. These particles contain enough kinetic energy to knock air molecules into space and strip away at our atmosphere continuously. Gravity is what holds down the air molecules of our atmosphere, while the magnetic field is the shield that prevents us from being attacked by relentless needles that would gradually have a destructive effect. He also says that UV light being bad for us is a presupposition. UV light is where it starts to be ionizing and destructive. This is because UV light carries enough energy to knock electrons of atoms out of their orbits. This can be seen from UV light killing bacteria since it breaks the molecular bonds of that bacteria. You can also read up on the photoelectric effect experiment for more information on how to measure the electrons that get knocked out. See my video right here on what light is for a ton more information on what makes up light and how it behaves. Another thing he says here is that I admit that our magnetic field isn't something backed by science or discovery. This is where most flat earthers get science wrong. In science, we don't just say something and hope for it to be true. We theorize based on observations, measurements, and predictions that all work out. If it doesn't work out, it's discarded as a failure, and we continue on that quest until things are explained well enough to make predictions out of them. Earth's magnetic field has a ton of evidence to show what it's made of, how it moves, how it creates electric currents, how that generates a magnetic field, and it all combines perfectly well with other areas of study. When you have this much evidence, there's pretty much no chance of being totally off the mark. We might just discover subtleties that we didn't account for, and it will become part of our understanding once we gain more information. He also says that hot metal loses its magnetic properties. Here he just missed part of the explanation. The iron core is not what's magnetic and creates the magnetic field around the Earth. The core is what creates an electric current, which in turn amplifies the magnetic properties found in metals to create a magnetic field. Experiments in labs prove this to be true, and that molten metal has the same effect as an electric coil to create a magnetic field. More recent experiments also included more of the behavior and turbulence of a spinning planet and continues to show a magnetic field from the electricity generated. You can get more information on this if you look for the molten metal magnet experiment from 2007. It was the first time that a magnetic field was self-generated by a fully turbulent flow and fluctuations. I'll leave a link to a small article about it in the description. Then he asked why everything has to be moving all the time. Well, that's because without movement, the transfer of energy would be severely limited, so it would make it even more unlikely that we'd be here asking the questions. Keep in mind that there's nothing in space to add friction, so objects in motion stay in motion. There's nothing completely still in space, not even the things that don't seem to be moving from our point of view. On top of that, he says that I think oceans don't slosh around as the Earth spins. They do. There's always some movement in the water, as you can easily tell by waves on a beach. The main thing to remember though is that one rotation takes 24 hours on Earth, so it's not a very fast spin at all. Try to spill any glass of water by doing a single revolution around you in 24 hours. It'll barely even move because it's so slow. So it's such a slow rotation, it's much more likely that other events will be responsible for adding turbulence to the water, like storms, rather than the spin of the Earth. Finally, he says there's not one iota of evidence for how the magnetic field is generated. As I already stated just previously, we have tons of evidence for all of this, as well as an experiment that reproduces it. For the rotation, we also have the Foucault pendulum, the 0.5% weight difference at the equator, the two versions of the night sky, the opposite rotations of the night skies, and much more that all prove the rotation. Analysis? He hasn't offered a single answer or explanation. He just tried to dismantle the scientific discoveries. This stems from a lack of understanding of the mechanics of what generates our magnetic field, and the incorrect assumption that the core is simply a magnet itself. Score? Fail. The question was avoided. Question 16. What keeps the sun and moon from simply falling to Earth? His answer? He says it's hearsay and nothing has been measured. We measured plenty of things. We used parallax to measure the distance to the moon. Then Halley spent a good part of his lifetime planning a measurement for astronomers all over the globe during a transit of Venus to get an accurate measurement of the sun's distance. This was repeated again 8 years later to confirm everything and make it more precise. Then this knowledge allowed us to make perfect predictions from that point on. That's far from being hearsay and having nothing measured. He also says that high school textbooks admit that the tilt of the Earth can't be measured. Now that's an absolute lie. We have the tilt measured pretty accurately since 1100 BC, that's over 3,000 years ago. Then it was refined in ancient Greece around 350 BC. We realized the tilt due to the opposite seasons in the northern and southern hemispheres, the duration of day and night that are not balanced as you move away from the equator, as well as temperatures of different places on Earth due to the difference between receiving direct sun rays or slanted sun rays. Today, elementary school students are taught how to measure it themselves using simple experiments. You can look them up if you're curious. Another thing he says is that the moon doesn't necessarily orbit the Earth. While on top of everything I've already offered in terms of knowledge we actively use for precise predictions that all work out, we also have our tides and the phases of the moon that show it. We can also calculate the barycenter of the Earth and Moon system. The barycenter is the center at which two bodies orbit each other. If it's right in between them, they're synchronized and orbit each other like two kids on a roundabout. For the Earth and Moon, the barycenter is just slightly off of our core, so we experience a tiny movement as the Moon orbits us. A bit like when you hold your child by the hands and spin him or her around as you turn on yourself. You feel a bit of a pull from that, but you're mainly remaining in a fixed position. This is how the Earth and Moon interact with each other. The Earth is the parent and the Moon is a child being spun around. Finally, he says that we made the Earth a sphere to allow for day and night. I still don't really understand when flat earthers say these things. Do they expect that what we write down on paper changes the behavior of the universe? It's quite the other way around. In this case, we analyzed, measured, and observed things around us that led us to this conclusion. A lot of these things can't be explained on anything else than a sphere that rotates, while still agreeing with other established knowledge. All this knowledge also allows us to explain things like our 50 days of midnight sun each year, our 28 days of polar night each year, and many other things like the northern and southern lights. Analysis? He still hasn't offered an answer here. He just tried to dismantle the science while offering no alternative. Score? Fail. The question was avoided. So this concludes part 1 of the video. If you haven't kept score, we're at 3 questions completely avoided and unanswered, 1 question that admits not knowing the answer, and 1 question where the answer is completely wrong since there was no tsunami in sight. If you're one of the flat earthers that was commenting saying that this destroys the globe, I would re-examine my beliefs at this point, since by all standards thinking this is simply delusional. Part 2 will be coming up soon, so stay tuned. If you like this video and want more content like this, please like and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions about what you'd like to talk about, put it down in the comments below or come follow me on Twitter or Facebook. Links are in the description. Until next time, thanks for watching, and remember, respect your intellect.